Hey everybody, my name is Miguel Ortega,
I'm Tran. How's it going?
and we're going over The Voice in the Hollow, a short film that we are documenting the process of the making of on a weekly basis. So, how's everybody doing? I see there's a few people already in here, which is pretty cool. So, so let's get started. So, this week was a pretty productive week. Um, what we needed to do is so far we've built, if you go back, if you're new to this, you should definitely start on the first episode. But what we decided to do was tackle the two main characters first, and then tackle the sets. And this is one of the last sets that we have left, because it is a short film, so there's not a lot of sets. And so we have our exterior shots, we have our town, and then we have the hollow, the hole, which the voice comes out of. And there's one more scene where one of our characters is initiated into like the hunting tribe. So this was early stages of doing it, just in Maya laying this out. And we're going to show you some of the things that we did to make this look cool. So this is what the shot looks like now. In terms of what the film is about, I recommend you go back and watch the first episode, because it's pretty long. We get really in depth into it, but in short, it's like a Cain and Abel story, told in like a fictional world, but inspired by the Moaning Cave caverns in California, which I recommend you look into. Which is basically a cave that would attract people, because they would hear the voice of a little girl and fall to their death, which is pretty horrific.
Yeah. And it's not the thumbnail of an online class. We just made it. So we just made
That's
it this past week. So it's,
Yeah, that's not a thumbnail. We literally made this week.
yeah, so
So
it's maybe something that looks kind of similar. I don't know, as a
yeah,
thumbnail.
yeah. So the idea of this room is that it's a ceremony room, and right now there's no hey Isam, there's no characters in there, but the idea would be, if you look on the left and right now, you can see that there would be characters lined up across the sides and in the front, which we don't have them ready to go. So I'm just turning them on and off just so we could get an idea. But that's the feel of it. We wanted this to feel still very primitive, still try to stay away from metal as much as possible. So almost everything in here is made out of wood or earth, with the exception of the leopard in the center, which is like the idol, which we thought would be, the one thing that they would focus the metal resources into, their god or whatever. And again, this is a tribe that doesn't exist, a people that doesn't exist. So we took liberties on making their religion. Okay. So this is entirely done in Unreal. Obviously, you could see this is entire Unreal thing. And we had 1 week to do this. So we had to figure out as many shortcuts as possible to get this to look cool. And most of this stuff is a combination of either completely done from scratch, Megascans elements that we would reuse to build other things. Thanks, Dennis. And some custom pieces as well, of course. The other thing that we're going to go through today that was pretty interesting is we started going online and looking for websites that had resources from museums. Like they had actually scanned artifacts and put these models online for people to use. So we started getting them and using them as certain props for this piece. Again, just because we have to speed stuff up. So if you look like on the right hand side, let me pause this. You have these like totem statues. They're not the most amazingly sculpted statues, but what we'll get into later today is how folk art is very easy to make fun of and say, oh, that looks goofy. Yet it's extremely hard for even a super skilled artist, and I'm not just saying us, I'm saying anyone, to replicate and to make it feel authentic. It always tends to look like a modern person doing folk art. Um, so when we found that there was a resource for some of this scan data online, we went in and basically rated it. So yeah. Oh, look, Alex is here. Thank you, sir.
As far as there's questions, just the two of us. We're the primary people. We do have some people helping us on the side, like
On stuff that we haven't shown yet. So
yeah,
yeah.
but we invest the most hours into this for sure.
So what we're having help on is our friend Chris Bostjatnik, who's doing the face shapes. Chris Bostjatnik is someone who helped us a lot on the Ningyo, and it's a pretty cool story because when we were doing the Ningyo short film, if you guys haven't seen it, you could Google it. It's Ningyo. He reached out to us to see if we needed help, and we told him that we needed blend shapes done on our characters, and he jumped in and helped us with a lot of the character blend shapes. And then he didn't we didn't pay him anything. We actually didn't even know him. We met him through that, and then he applied with the reel from the Ningyo to get a job. And if I'm not mistaken, it was with that piece. His job was to do the face shapes on Thanos on the Avengers movie. So it's pretty cool. So he's now helping us with the blend shapes on
Yeah,
the characters.
and he's really amazing. He's really really good.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's the coolest guy. So, okay, so you can see the main structure here, pretty straightforward, nothing very complex. And everything here, with the exception of these tusks, is Megascan's elements that have been essentially just grabbed, modified, and kind of used the way the tribes probably would have used it. They would have cut the wood to shape and then started making scaffolds and whatever. So we were like, let's do the exact same process. Let's just grab these pieces that are beautifully modeled scans and textures, and let's just build stuff with it. And I kind of wanted it to feel more linear and rigid because I didn't want to over art direct these things because I knew that the center was going to be the focus. So even like the bonfire here, all of this is just, let me see why this shader. Oh, it's because I know what it is. Some of these shaders are just not popping up. But all this stuff here is basically just Megascan elements that have been scattered, rotated around to look like fire pits. You can see a lot of them are repetitive, but you can't really tell once you see them from certain angles.
Yeah, so we're using their Megascan assets like Lego blocks,
Exactly.
basically, and just trying to assemble new things from it.
Yeah. So if you look at it not as like, hey, it's just there's a one wood beam, just put a wood beam in the shot. No, look at it as, hey, if you have 1,000 wood beams, you could build a house with it. That's kind of how we approach this. Same thing with the bricks here. Same thing with the platform here. So then we started getting into we need to build stuff like this. We need to build a bunch of tusks. And tusks are one of those things that is very easy to say, oh, it's just a tusk. It's pretty simple. It's just a cylinder essentially with a taper to it. And it is if you want to do a mediocre tusk, but we wanted to get these tusks to feel extremely nice. So again, we went on this website called, I'll show you guys, Sketchfab. And if you look on here, you can find all kinds of stuff, and a lot of things come from certain museums. And a lot of them are public property, public domain, so you could just use them if you want to. And a lot of it is free to use. And some of this stuff is extremely beautiful. There is some problems with it. Some of it is pretty decent models, maybe not something that you would use as a hero asset, but it's definitely a great starting point. But the textures tend to fall apart because of the way they're captured. So we needed to find a workflow. Hello, guys. So we needed to find a workflow to get this stuff ingested, retopologized, re-UV'd, and then retextured as quickly as possible because we didn't want to spend, again, we have like a week to do this. We didn't want to spend the entire time. You could spend a couple of days doing this awesome uh, naked guy standing on this woman's head. So, so we didn't want to do that. All right, so let's go through the workaround here. So I'll show you a real simple one here. So you can see we have the statue. Let me put this guy. This is already retopologized. This it's on a layer. So we have this really nice scan that I downloaded. And you can see it's very nice detail. It's been cleaned up. The UVs though are not the best. So if I go to my saved layouts, if I go to my UV texture editor, give it a second.
Oh, it's really heavy.
Yeah,
It would
that's
take
one of the things that we've
a
really
moment
been
to
noticing this
load.
past week is just
How slow things get.
everything that has to do with Maya has become compared to working in Unreal. So so here's my UVs here. So this guy, I think he might not even have UVs, this guy. So I think this guy does. Oh, there they are. So you could see not the nicest of UVs. It's broken up into a zillion pieces. So even if you put a 4K tile, it's kind of messy, not ideal.
It's automatic mapping.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's not going to cut it. So what I decided to do is I'm like, what if I grab this? In a few episodes past, we talked about this quad remesher tool. It's a plugin that is pretty incredible, and you could come in here and put, I want 5,000 polys. You can set edge loops based on poly groups, the way you can in ZBrush. You could set adaptive sizes so it adjusts depending on the detail. So I'll just turn this on, and I'm not going to use this exact one because there was a tiny bit of cleanup that I had to do on this, and I'll show you where, but it does a pretty good job fairly quick.
It's quick when you're not streaming.
Yeah, it's quick when you're not streaming.
And
Well, trust me, if you think this is slow, if I was retopologizing this,
oh man, no.
you guys would all sign off. Just give me 1 second. So is it done in Maya?
We do some stuff in
Yeah.
Maya, but everything is being lit.
In Unreal, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess rendered, even though it's real time.
Yeah. So this is what we have. So you can see pretty nice considering it's completely automated. It's not symmetrical because the sculpture is not symmetrical either. So I wouldn't expect that. The only area that this one is giving me issues with is here. And I think it might have to do with the fact that the scan might actually have, that's not it. That the scan might actually have a hole in the head or something. Oh, I know what this is. Give me 1 second. It hides, yeah, it got weirded out about this area here because there's holes in here, I'm assuming. But anyway, it did not like this area. So I had to clean this up for sure. So what I ended up doing is that just going in there and fixing that up, which was pretty simple. It was just a matter of grabbing this, and it's you could see this is the only area that was problematic. There was some floaty stuff, and I'm thinking that there's something inside of that scan that was causing this. So I'll just increase this size here, and I could just delete it, and then just fill in the hole here, which is what we ended up doing here. So fairly simple. The mesh, like I said, here it's not the most beautiful thing, but it's fine. The whole point of this is to speed this up and not spend an entire day trying to do this model.
Yeah, and
okay?
it's not a performing character.
Yeah.
So,
This is going to be probably a tiny little thing. Again, if you even look at the ones here that we consider kind of hero, you can't really even see them. You feel them, and that's important. You can see that there's a couple statues here. I still actually haven't placed the one that I'm showing right now. Probably place them like down here or up here somewhere. But the idea again is not to see the statue, it's to feel that the statue is there. Okay. So here it is. It's retopologized, and really quickly bringing this into Maya's tools and just re-UVing this as good as possible. Pretty quickly, just did a planar projection on this, right? Select it as good as possible. Pretty sloppy, I must say, across the center line, and just cutting it and then laying it out to take up as much of the 4K tile as possible. Okay, now I'll show you, so that's this one. I'll show you another one here that I really like this one a lot. Let me just close this up. My Maya has been going insanely slow when I'm dealing with this many assets. So it's, yeah, it makes me appreciate Unreal that much more because there's just no delay at all in Unreal, and I'm
It's
dealing
strong.
with, yeah, it's
Yeah, it's very
just,
strong. Does quad remesher work even complicated models without further work?
yes.
It does, but it's not perfect.
Yeah, to say,
So
yeah, Q 9-inch nails. To say, does it work on complicated models? Yes, it does. But is it going to give you?
is
You
it?
can never use it for a character. You
Yeah,
can
and
use
then
it for this sort of
but
stuff.
sometimes it doesn't work on small details very well. So
Yeah. Here's the thing, though. The areas that sometimes don't work, there's workarounds for it. Like if I would have looked at that model carefully, I probably could have said like, "Hey, there's a hole there." I probably could have smoothed that out inside of Mudbox or ZBrush, and then it would have done a good job. The other thing is when things come to a very sharp taper, what I usually do, it'll have problem with that because the distance threshold is very close with the vertices. So I'll just inflate it a little bit more. My favorite tool is just regular quad draw in Maya, like a hand topology. So that's how I would always do anything that is super important. This is just again for like background props. But anyway, when things come to a taper and they'll have issues because the points are too close, what I'll do is I'll inflate it a little bit, retopologize it, auto retopologize it with quad remesher. So now the vertices are not so close together, they're further apart. So it'll give a nice topology there. And then I'll just use like the pinch brush and Mudbox and just tighten it back up, and it's perfect. So, so let me show you this. So this is, let me see, this is the low. So this is one of the other pieces that we brought, and I showed you guys this a while ago. It's one of the tusks, and I just like fell in love with these pieces. So I didn't want to use the same tusk over and over and over again because I thought that would be lazy. So I use each tusk twice, but since I knew that it was going to be flipped, it would look like two separate pieces. Okay, so I did that, but I wouldn't try to not reuse it again. And you could see how nice this one looks. There's all this breakage to it and everything. And again, this is coming from the same scan website. You can see there's imperfections and stuff like that, but for the most part, these are some of the things like rocks that a lot of people look at and don't think it's that cool or that difficult to do until you have to do it. And then you realize, damn, this is not that easy. Rocks are one of the biggest ones. Where when I was the modeling lead at Digital Domain, we were working on Thor. We had one of the most amazing model departments, and you would see these amazing modelers just completely collapse when you had them do like a really nice rock or a boulder. It was pretty hard. It was easy to make it look like a faceted turd. It was not good to make it look like a really nice natural rock.
yes, rocks are really tough.
Yeah.
I always try to avoid it.
Yeah, and if
because they're generally underestimated.
And they're thankless.
They're thankless, and since they're underestimated, if you do a good job, no one says, "Oh wow, you're great."
Yeah.
They expect you just to do a good job.
And if you do a bad job,
They just say you're the worst.
you're the worst. So
But
it's completely the worst. Yeah.
yeah, and there's never time like proper time allocated to that type of stuff. So you
Yeah.
have to do it fast when you need more time.
Totally. So you could see here we got these guys, and I'm just decided let's give this a shot and let's just quad remesh them both together. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I brought the topology to like 20,000 polys, and I just ran it. And again, it's pretty unsupervised. This one gave me small details, and it tends to be the problems happen in the scans if they're really messy. They have vertices that get too close to each other or overlap, and that's when it gets confused. But you can see there it is. It's retopologized, pretty nice, pretty high poly. 20,000 polygons is nothing small, but pretty good. So now I UV'd this like I UV'd the fertility chubby mom with baby, and we bring it into the next step. So let's do that. So now I have a low-res model that looks really nice. A low-res model that has proper UVs and proper topology, and a really nice scan that has terrible UVs and terrible topology. So I'll just bring it in here. And what I'll just do is I'm going to open up, let's just open up the file. So you can see I have the high model. Let's bring that in first, which is the scan. And you could totally do this in ZBrush with the Z project, but I'm a Mudbox user. So we have this here, and I'll just rename this high. You can see our object list is just like our outliner in Maya, which is what I like, or like Unreal. And then I'll just come over here and I'll bring in the low polygon model, which I'll just rename as low so that I know what is what. Okay. And I just go to I'm just going to hide the high res model. So I have this mesh transfer details. Okay. So it's not like you have to select this one and then spin 4 times and then come over here. It's pretty simple. Well, select the one, select the other, transfer details. So what is your target model? Your low. What is your high model? High. Transfer details, right? That's pretty straightforward. Just give it a second. Something I should mention is I have a lot of 3D programs open at the same time, so my graphics cards are probably chugging. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So there's a possibility that something could crash or something because I have the streaming plus Maya open, plus Mudbox open, plus
Yes, a lot
Unreal
of
open.
stuff.
So I try to not have everything open all the time. But I don't want to make this about me opening files all over the place. So there you go. You can see everything is transferred over really nicely. If I select the model and I select the UVs, you can see the UVs are missing. So you just have to go to UVs and maps, recreate level UVs. So what it does is as a way of optimizing performance, it doesn't build the UVs at the higher subdivision levels, just on the lower subdivision levels. It's always there. They're not deleted, and they look exactly like they look in Maya, but it's just not subdividing it and carrying it along until you set that, which is something that's pretty important to remember. Okay, so there she is, lovely woman. She's ready to be exported and brought into Substance, and the same thing was done for all the tusks. So I'll just show you that workflow in Substance real quick. Substance is, just an amazing program that I hope starts getting a little bit faster with multiple tiles, because I really think if they were able to handle more UDIMs quicker, it would just be the greatest program in the world. It's pretty amazing as is already, but So let me just hide this and I'll show you how we just textured this fairly quickly. So again, we're not trying to make hero assets here. We're making cool props in the background. So first thing is megascans, right? So I would just go to my file, import resources, and I have a big megascans library, and I just loaded up, let's see where it is, megascans downloads. So I went to my rock, and I knew that there was a lot of texture already on the model, on the scan, so I didn't want anything that looked like it had a lot of detail to it. So I picked like one of the rock smooth textures. And I just brought the albedo, displacement, normals, and roughness. Okay, so just bring those guys in, set these all to texture, keep them in this project. I'm just going to import it, and there that you can see that they're set up. So I already have a base texture in here, but I'll just create another one. So I'll just do a fill. You can see it turns all white. And you can see I'm going to bring this over here. I have the textures that I just brought in my shader. So now it just becomes a real simple thing of just throwing the height into the height, albedo into the base color, the normal into the normal, and the roughness into the roughness. I always set this to, I'm going to move this over here to the side and this over to the side. I'll set the UV projection method or projection method to triplanar. That way, it's not worried about UV seams, which is just amazing. Okay, so you can see when you bring that in at first, it looks pretty bad. Okay, and a few things, the scale of it, we got to get that down. But before anything, the height is just way too high, and that's the height information that it's bringing in from Megascans. So I'm just going to bring this in and set it to something super low, like 2. Okay, that's great. And then I'm going to go to my normals, bring that down quite a bit, something like that. And then let's go to our base color. So you can see that's the base texture that I had before. And this is the new one that I brought in. I'm actually kind of glad that I had 2 of them because I almost wish I had a little bit more breakup. So if I wanted to blend between the 2 of these, something I could do really quickly is just create a mask, just create a black mask, super simple. Come over here and set a fill layer on my mask. So now the object is going to appear like there's nothing there. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm just going to grab any noise texture here. So I could grab, I like these, and just drag them in here. Okay, and this is going to act as the mask for the 2 different layers. So wherever it's white, you'll see one and you won't see the other. So something like that. And now you can see that it's blending between the 2 of them. Okay, I could invert this. So that looks pretty good. Next thing I want to do is I want to bake out these materials. They're called like utility maps. Or they're called mesh maps, but I call them utility maps. Okay, so I just go to bake mesh maps. I'm going to set this to 2048. I could load up the same high model. So there it is. I don't know how much difference it's going to make since they're basically exactly the same. And I'll just bake selected textures. Okay, I already have them, and that's going to give you a normal map. I'll show you some of these here. So it'll give you something like this. So yeah, I do have to rebake those because it's not giving me so let's bake them real quick. They're not in here. So let's bake selected textures. Give it a second. So it's going to calculate world space normals, ID maps, ambient occlusion, curvature, position, and thickness. And these are going to be maps that aren't necessarily used for you to use directly in the texture, but they're used to drive procedural textures. Let me see if anybody's saying anything in the chat while it's doing it. Okay, so now all the maps have been baked out. So you can see if I come over here and I check, like I have my normal map, my ID map, curvature map, position. Position is actually pretty awesome, and we'll get into some of this stuff in a second. Okay, so just come back over here so you can see now we have these 2 layers. Pretty cool. Okay. Next up, something super simple. I just created just a white layer, something like that. I set the mode to just color, set it to something like white. So there it is. And then I could create a mask the same way I just showed you. And that is now putting a white color over everything. So if I bring it up to full intensity, it looks like this. Doesn't look that great. Looks kind of cool. But if I set this to overlay and I bring this down to like 74 or something, maybe something like that, you can see it just breaks up the rock a little bit more, which is kind of nice. Okay. Next up, just going in and selecting like a red color. So I don't want to ever use like black to darken cavities and stuff like that. So what I did here was just a completely like red layer, like a maroon layer that is multiplied. So it darkens it. And then over here, I just added a generator. And for the generator type, I selected my ambient occlusion. So let me see where those settings are. Okay. So I set the ambient occlusion and it gives me this as a mask. So you can see now every area that would have ambient occlusion is now darkened. Okay. Now I don't always like to darken the crevices. I like to start with the darkening, but then, so you can see this is another one. And this is using, I believe this is using the curvature. So it's going into all the nooks and crannies that are in the actual scan. And it's doing the same thing. So you can see it's darkening it just a little bit. And I have this set to a low value, but you can see if I bring this up, it could start looking a little bit like cavity map in ZBrush, which I just don't like that look. I think you should never see the cavity map. You should feel the cavity map. And you hear me say that all the time. Like my students at Gnomon probably hate me for saying that all the time, but I say that all the time. You shouldn't see it. You should feel it. You should see it starts darkening all the crevices. And then I want it like dust. So there we have like a dust layer, same exact concept, like a light brown color. You have your mask. So we have like a dirt, which is pretty cool generator. And then break that up with a noise and multiply it. So we have just something like this. This one here, this one's pretty cool. So this is using your position mask, which is pretty cool because you can see it's with this mask setting, you can control, let me see where my, you could control certain things like if I come over here to my position pass, the height of the object. So you could isolate it based on the height. So you could do top to bottom, bottom to top, whatever. And what's cool about that is you use this and then multiply a fractal on it. And now it looks like there's more mud on the floor because it's been down on the ground for millennia or whatever. So probably could have spent more time with this. But again, it was just boom, 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 trying to knock as many of these out as possible. And last but not least is, I mean, it's bird poop. Fuck it. It is what it is. You can see we have like some drips here. I just toned them down a little bit so they weren't so horrible. But
A rock wouldn't look like a rock without bird poop on it.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Sorry about that, guys. But Would you not want to poop on this if you were a bird? So
No,
we
it's
added
not.
that.
Hey, dumb question. When baking the high poly mesh over the low one in substance, is there a problem if the high poly isn't very clean in topology?
No,
No.
no.
It just has to be on top of it. It can't be like over to the side.
Yeah. So that's this guy, and I'll just show one more, but I'm going to go through it really fast, so I could pass this over to Tran, who's going to show some awesome stuff. But we did a bunch of these, just a bunch of these. So all the tasks, there was dozens of them, a bunch of little statues, bunch of statues. But you could see how nice this looks, and it's completely textured procedurally. It feels like bone, and then I put some paint on it. I knew that this was going to be seen from very far away, so probably could have spent a little bit more time on the paint, but it looks fine. Probably toned down the height of it when I look at it now, but you can see it looks pretty good. And the texture job for this was literally a couple of minutes. If you were to try to do this traditional way, just would take a long time. So it's just putting these layered textures, triplanar, blending them together, getting some grime in there, darkening it just like we did with the chubby statue, and then the crevices and whatever. So just running through all of that, but all of these are scans, and you could see them if I come back over here. Let me close this up. So you can see, let me turn this off here. It's going to look a little bit brighter for a second, but you can see all the detail on all of these guys, and all of that is just coming directly from the scan data. So we can come over here, look at these, and just textured on the fly the way I showed you guys. So yeah, pretty cool process. We're still going to put in a few more statues here and there. Yeah, we have a few over here that are hiding in the shadows. Going to put a few more over here. So, but yeah, that's the scan technique. So highly recommend this website if you don't know about it already. There's some incredible stuff here. Someone just logged in.
It's me. I just shared my screen.
Oh, okay, I see. So yeah, so pretty amazing site. Highly recommended. What's cool is I don't have the link saved, but there's particular like channels for like the British Museum, the Paris Museum, and they have just incredible stuff. Very highly detailed. Again, the texture stuff isn't the greatest, but if you use it as a background prop, you could do the technique that I just showed you guys, and you could see it works pretty well, pretty quick. So I'll come back in a little bit and I'll show you how we ended up doing the floor, the rose petals, and all this other stuff. But I'm going to pass this on to Tran to go over, the whole idea with folk art. Oh, wait, I should probably show one thing before. So let me just show you some of the stages before Tran jumped on this. And when we started like thinking about, should we put an idol there or not? So give me 1 second. So that you can see this is very early on in the layout. So this came first. And you can see even at this stage, we're already thinking about what would look cool. So pretty crappy drawings. We're not doing this. Well, we knew you guys were going to see it, but we wanted to be real about it. And it's like when we're doing concepts for us, it's like, is this look cool? Does this look cool? And it's just splotches. But you can see, even though this looks like a mess, it's exactly the same as what ended up being here. Everything, like the shape of the curtains, the tusks, the fire pit was obviously already there, but everything was planned out even at this early stage. So you can see we already have like the clothing that the people would wear. And this is when we started thinking that maybe we should put a big leopard in the center. And like I said earlier, it would be the only metal object in this tribe, or the one that has the most amount of metal. Uh, and yeah, and I'll let Tran take over. But you can see once Tran modeled the leopard, which she's going to go into right now, even designing the curtains, it just became like this process of back and forth, back and forth. So I'll pass this to Tran, who's going to show you guys some awesome stuff. So Tran, take over.
Okay, so here is my reference board. So we did some research on what the idol should look like, and leopards right here, you can see these are all leopard folk art references with different looks, right? I really like this piece a lot. Now, there's a bit of thing that we don't really talk about, but Miguel and I talk. We don't talk publicly to other people, but we talk amongst ourselves a lot. It's just art direction. So I think you look at this and you go, oh, it's very simple. You can compare it to like Michelangelo, right? And you're like, yeah, okay, so this must be really easy, but it's not really. There's an aesthetic that's very hard to match. There's no doubt that if you see this, you know right away it's probably a museum piece, right? So yeah, and there's a lot of beautiful stuff on it, right? The craftsmanship is really awesome. It also has like a kind of a charm, I guess I would say, where it looks really happy and lighthearted, and I like that. But we don't really want that in our stuff.
Yeah, it was a weird balance because we wanted the authenticity of these, but not. He like looks like a goofy little guy, right? We wanted him to look like a cool thing, but still not look like a badass thing that looks modern. We wanted it to still feel real.
I mean, and then some of these here, like I have all these other references. Let's see. Checking out these masks. They're leopards. They're both leopards. So you can see the way, some of their spots are abstract. But it's not so easy. So and we know this, right? Like we always talk about like how do we get to certain style, what we don't, and then certain things that we don't want. So I'll show you my progress. Get here. Okay, so we decided let's do like a leopard type of statue. This is a really big piece. It's like 3 times the height of a person in our story, and we also know she's gonna probably walk up to it. So it's kind of like a hero piece because it's large and it's important, and it's gonna possibly could be really close in the shot. So it should be done properly, right?
Which is also why we chose to not use a museum piece for this, right? Because again, we don't mind using mega scan stuff or scans off of online if it's for side pieces or whatever. But when it's like, something that this is their god, we have to make that.
Yeah, we have to. Plus, there's not really anything like that
Yeah.
what we were looking for. So this is like a really quick, dirty block in. I basically took spheres, smushed it around, and just tried to get some kind of posture. And then once I took that, I started sculpting it. Now, this doesn't look folk arty at all, but I decided just kind of do what I normally would do. So it's, it's still general, but it's leaning more towards realistic. What I didn't want, and I really like this, but I didn't want the figure to look like this. So I feel like if I kind of start a little bit more what I normally do, and again, I love this, but he's really happy and cute. That's not what we want, right? So I just decided, okay, let's just start here, and then we'll push back on that and try to get it more folk arty. But I do kind of have a leopard here, and then here, I started sculpting it out a little bit more, sticking some teeth in, but it doesn't look folk arty at all. And so I started coming over here and started going, okay, let's bring in, let's look at the mask more. Maybe let's just borrow some of those aesthetics. And it's starting to look a little bit better, but it still feels like, contrived, right? Especially with these cheekbones. It's something that you might expect like in a more current stylized medium. So then I just kept, trying to push back. And then now what I did here was just simplify all the forms. So it's just going back here and then studying like, okay, everything is very simplistic. If you look here, the legs are like tubes. The head is just like round. And let's just try to match this type of face, right? And so I went backwards.
Which let me interrupt for a second. Throughout this entire process, this model is being put into the scene and looked at in Unreal with the lighting from very early on, just so we could see what's working and what is definitely not working.
Yeah. So we're looking at it as we go. So I come back here, and you can see all the shapes are much more simplified. Like this is not really, it's not done, but there's more complexity. And then here it's just, okay, let's just keep everything simple curves, right? So let's see. I have a pen, but you can see this curve, very, very just simple shapes, and then trying to keep just super, super simple. Okay. So once we kind of got that, I just went in and I started polishing it, right? And I brought in the facets back in because that's how the characters look. So I wanted to keep that aesthetic on it. And then I added this kind of beard detail, which was really interesting. So you can see, I tried to match this type of face a little bit, except this is a mask and it looks like it's really flat. So this one has a bit more dimension. Okay. So now we had this and we were cool with this. The next step that I wanted, or that we wanted, was I wanted like this type of spiral pattern. And I just had to think about like, how am I going to do this? So in my head, I very quickly, what are the multiple approaches? Like one, I could sculpt this in ZBrush, but this would take a very long time to do. It would probably also end up really uneven, right? So I could see myself very quickly, doing art math in my head, that I could end up with swirls that are like different sizes and like maybe oval instead, because they're not just circle, they're spirals, right? So, trying to get like, you can see my spiral that I'm trying to draw is like really terrible. Right? So a spiral is not that easy to consistently produce. They're actually like, if you look at the thickness of the lines, they're very, very even. So,
Which
okay,
is a testament to, even as primitive as this art looks,
it's really,
there's a lot of skill there.
there's a lot of skill in this. Like this is, it's very beautiful. And yeah, so whoever sculpted this or created this was probably took a long time to make it. So I already know, okay, sculpting this is like not what I want to do because it's going to take forever. And also the other thing to think about is you always want to create some kind of workflow that's easy to change. So the last thing I want to do is spend like, days on this and then decide, oh, I need to move that one spiral thing. And then, it all just falls down like a snowball or like a domino effect. So that's not effective. There's a few other ways to do it, but really the best way to create something like this is really to just do it in Substance Designer. Right now, the thing is, I don't know Substance Designer super super well. I probably messed with it like once or twice a few years ago, but this was I saw it as a good opportunity. Like for someone who's really good in Substance Designer, this is probably really simple and easy for them to do. Um, a lot of the stuff that you see us doing, it's like something that we've been practicing and doing for years, and that's why we can kind of do it very quickly. So I decided, hey, if I can add this in my tool bag, Substance Designer, it just becomes another tool that I'm just going to start to build up and get better at, and I will get faster at it. And it just opens up more options, right? So it's just like, okay, let's just try it out. So let me open up Substance Designer. You can see right here what my final thing ended up looking like. But let me just go through the breakdown of this graph. So the first thing I thought, let's go over here. First thing I thought is like, I got to get the spiral. Now, the spiral, I just got this like, art, some graphic online. And then I didn't want to draw it. So I got it from just somewhere on the web, right? And I did a few processes. Now, here, let me just, sorry, I just made a mess. I have a bunch of stuff hooked up in here. Okay. Let me just open this from scratch. So that'll probably be easier. Or I'm already have this open. Okay, so let's just say I have this from scratch. Now, a couple of things. Normally this starts out with, like, say something like a cube, right? You can rotate your lighting. What I can do here is I can go to under my scene and change the type of geometry that I can use. To me, the plane just seemed like the best choice. So I have a 3D representation, and then I have a 2D representation of the same exact thing. Now, when I'm working, I'm going to create two outputs here. And I really just want to see my height. I want one to act like a height map and one like a normal map. So let me just quickly create a normal conversion here. Okay. So let's just say I did just some simple processes. Let's plug this in here and plug this in here. And I can set this to preview. So I'm not seeing this here, right? That's where I want to see it. I can right click on this, view in 3D, set to normal. So now you can see it's showing up as normal map. And then I'm going to view this in 3D as a height map. Okay. And I'm not really feeling the height, so I can come and adjust. So if I go to my materials, it's all controlling materials. This is material I have selected. By default, it's usually parallax occlusion, which is kind of more normal mappy. I want tessellation so that I can actually get actual height. Now, if I come here and I edit this will bring up my material, and I can change my scale. So if I up my scale, now I'm seeing the change in my height. Okay, so now if I look at this map, I can see all kinds of weird noises on it, and it's just this artifact from the JPEG online. So I start trying to process it. One, I put a bevel on it. So let's plug this in. Right. So you can see my bevel. It looks really spiky. So I put a blur right here. This is a blur that softens it a little bit, and you see now it looks much nicer. Okay, so now the surface is smooth. The next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to scatter it. So, I just kind of search some random thing. I started with shape splatter. What this one does here. This is a search window. It's similar to like Substance. There's a lot of nodes, which I don't know. I'm pretty sure I can't memorize all this. So I can just look for whatever I want, type it in here, and something will pop up, right? So if I come over here, I can type this, and let's find the shape splatter. Okay, so I have something like that. And I could drive this. Whatever I have click here will show up here. It won't preview here unless I plug it in, or at least the way I have it set up, plug it into here. But I can plug in a pattern into pattern right here. And you can see it showing, something showing up, okay? So it's really light, and I can change the count like this. This is too many, right? So I went pretty low. I went like about 3. Okay. And I can change the scale, okay? And I can randomize it like this. You can also give it position randomization just so it moves a little bit. And then you can also randomize this. Now, the one thing I did have trouble here, when I went into position random, they start crossing over, which you don't want because it shouldn't be doing spiral crossover. Like if I check my references, there's none of that happening in here. Like we don't see spirals in spirals, so I had to be a bit careful with this. Okay, so I went here, I did all that, and I got this, which worked. But I have all these gaps, right? I didn't match this exactly, but there are some overlapping spirals you can see right here, and then some underneath. So I can tell that aesthetically overlapping it is okay, but I can't overlap it in here because I'll get this crossover. So what I did is I split it in 2. So I created a second one, which with a different pattern, and then this one here. And then I ended up merging them into this blend, right? And then you can see how that looks. Now, before that, if we look at this here, you can see the spirals are really perfect. I'm sure, you know, while crafting this, the craftsman or the artist was trying to make this perfect, but we don't want it to be perfect because it looks really CG. So what I do then is I run it through a warp node. So I have this perfect tile, and you create a warp, which distorts it, and then here it also distorts it, and then I combine it together to get this kind of look. Okay. So now I have that. We can plug it in to preview this. Okay, they look a little bit strong, but that looks okay. It seems like it's working. Forgot this node. Left this behind. Okay, so it looks better. And then the next thing I need were the little squares, these little guys here. Okay, so with that, I didn't really know where to start. So, I mean, I somehow figured it out. I don't think it's supposed to be really difficult to do compared to other things I've seen done in Substance Designer, but you know, it was encouraging that it wasn't too tricky. So here I have a polygon. This is procedural. It's just a square. Now I don't want the square to be perfect because they're not really square here either. They're like faceted, right?
Marshmallows.
Yeah. So I created a second shape here and I blended them together. So this one subtracted from this one, which gave me this faceted shape, right? And it's really perfect. So I ran it through a warp node. Now the warp is being driven by this Gaussian. So depending on how noisy it is, if it's really noisy, it just does this, which is not what I'm looking for. I brought the scale down, and you can see it's just giving me a slight wobble. And then I gave it a bevel, and I'm going to move through this. And right now it looks kind of faded. So if I plug it in here, it will probably look a little bit strange. It looks all right. Now that kind of gives me a shape, but I do want it to be a little bit higher in the center because they feel raised right here. So, you know, coming up to a peak. So what I did here is I created a gradient here, right? So I just brought this shape, I blurred it the heck out of it, and then I leveled it, which gave me this gradient. And then what I did is I added these together and ended up with this, right? So now I still have the shape, but then I have this added on top. So if I connect these, now it looks really soft, but it's still there. It is kind of rising up a little bit. Now, the next thing I wanted to add is I wanted to give it some facets. So there's probably a more efficient way to do this. Um, again, I'm new to this program, so I probably use way more notes than what I needed, right? I know I needed something like this because I look at it and, we look at this, there's facets, but this is not ready to go because, we're having like these weird height variations, right? And if I slap that on top, it's not going to work. So I tried doing things like creating edges out of this, getting that, and then I tried to blur it to try to get this, and then I leveled it. Now there's a sharpened node graph or node, but it doesn't seem to work on my computer. And I Googled that. So I think that's partially why I needed so many, because I just could not sharpen it. So you can see me using levels over and over as a way to try to sharpen it, but it's not really technically the correct way to do it. But I ended up with something like this. So this eventually kind of worked out, right? And then I added this shape here plus this, did some corrections, right? And then I ended up with this kind of stone piece, which looks a little bit soft right now. Now at the end, what I did was I just added this spiral here to these guys. Now, if I look back at my references, basically the place that they're sitting, they're always sitting in between the circles. And then sometimes they're like right on the center of the spiral. Doesn't seem like they are all the time, but for the most part, we want to kind of keep them not on the circle. So what I did then is I used the tie sampler. Now the sampler can work by mask. So what I took is I took this one, turned this into a mask, plugged it into this part here, and then that controls where it's going to populate, right? So you can see it's roughly matching the position over here. And I just did it in multiple passes, right? Just to get that control. And then I merged them together and then let me just jump forward because I think this can get very tedious. Eventually got this once I merged that. Now the nice thing about Substance Designer is that it's tileable, meaning, if I come here and I look at the map, this is that one square piece I'm making. And if I press this button here, you can see that there's no seams, right? It's just, and you don't have to think about it. It automatically will do that as you're working. It's going to always try to keep it tileable. I export these maps. Now, the thing is, I see how this works at the height, and it works for me. How am I going to apply it onto this? So I don't really want to try to do this part in ZBrush because, also, even though if I have that map, it would take a long time to try to control that. A better way of doing that is just doing it by texturing, right? So let's jump over here. Okay, so there were some questions. This is ZRemesh out of ZBrush, so it's automatic. And there was a question in the chat about like how does this hold up? Well, this piece did not hold up. So I ran Quad Remesher, the same application or plugin that Miguel showed. And no matter what I kept doing, I couldn't get like this detail. So, if I increased the poly count, it just wouldn't do it, right? So I ended up using the ZRemesher, but I had all kinds of trouble because it took a long time to UV. And this is one of the pieces that you really need to have proper UVs on. So let me show you why. Let me just load this up in Substance. Oh, it just crashed. Let's do it again. Let's open this. This is final look. I'll give you a better look in a second. Let me just hide all this. And let's drop this. Okay, so this pattern doesn't work well if it's triplanar, right? So for the most part, if your UVs are really terrible, say I create this fill, and let me just grab these textures from Substance Designer. Okay, so here's my spiral textures. I'll just drop in the norm map. That's probably enough just to demonstrate. Okay, so it's right here. Let's just drop it in here. All right, so I can see this all over. And then here where I've tried to hide the seams, you can totally see it. So, okay, so if I lay it out like this, my seams are very visible. And if I drop it to triplanar, which is what you normally can do, it doesn't work well in the pattern. You can see what happens is at the blending point, it just does this. Now, if it's like dirt or rocks, that type of material, it doesn't matter. But usually it doesn't work on textile unless it's really fine or any kind of pattern. And I didn't want this. So I had to painfully UV this. And I hit a really big bottleneck because it was just so slow. So that took, I think the longest time I spent was just trying to UV this. The way I UV'd it was just basically trying to reduce the number of seams. So I just stuck all the seams horribly in the back and then tried to keep the seams in the front minimal. Once I had it like that, I don't know what this instance is.
Quick synth, you're asking if quad remeshers work for retopologizing human faces, especially with topology that's ideal for face animation? No, not at all.
Yeah.
No.
You want total control. Anyway, so the triplanar didn't work. The UVs was a nightmare. That took the longest time. Why it took so long is the mesh is dirty, right? So it's Z mesh. It doesn't have clean loops. The model is too dense for something like Maya to work in. So you can see all my seams are really jagged and really strange because of the way I had to UV it. So yeah, once it was UV'd, it worked out really well. And then what I did is I just basically looked at it and go, okay, so how many times do I want to tile this? And say I settle for something like this. Now this is really flat, right? I actually want more dimension. You can see, the rocks are like paper, right? I'm not getting the extrusion. Now remember I said I had a choice to do this in ZBrush sculpturally, which didn't seem like the best idea. The best idea was to use substance, right? Auto UV would just give me a ton of seams. So the problem is I don't want seams because I can't lay out the spiral. I'll have all kinds of seams showing up all over the place. Okay, so anyway, let's jump back to this.
So that was a response to that.
Yeah, I was just a response to a question. I jumped back to this and I ended up applying the texture. So I textured this, I created this texture in Substance. I applied it in, Substance Designer, and I applied it in Substance Painter. I exported a map. I took that map and applied it into Mudbox. Why did I do it in here? Normally I use ZBrush. So the reason why I did it in here was multiple reasons. One big reason is that this has UDIMs, right? So if you don't know what a UDIM is is basically one square tile. So basically, if you look at any, application, that would be one UDIM, and this would be a second UDIM. And UDIM is just a technical term for that. That's what we call it for whatever reason. That's just the word, right? And with Mudbox, you don't actually have to worry about that. In ZBrush, you have to do one UDIM at a time. So I would have to process this piece. I have 5 UDIMs, right? The other reason is because I get stair stepping in ZBrush, so it doesn't display smooth. It gives me these artifacts on the surface where instead of the surface should be like this, the surface does this. It just does this weird stepping, and I didn't want that. So here's my displacement here. of the spiral. And then I thought the little round pieces don't pop up enough. So I isolate them as a mask. So if I come back here, back into my substance designer graph, I ended up extracting, these are the mask here for the stone. So I had all this extra control. So it was definitely the best choice to use substance designer. So I have this control where this comes out a little bit more. And then I felt like the underneath sculpt was lost a little bit. What I mean is this, right? So I laid this on top of it just to bring back some of the facets, but not have it be too strong. Right? And then I got my layers. Once I had this, I then brought it back into a substance painter. Let me just reload the file. And I textured it properly. So it was back and forth, sculpting, texturing, and then back to texturing again. It sounds like not a, clean workflow, but it actually is super clean and it's very fast. It's much faster than sculpting all of this. Okay. And so I ended up with something like this.
She ended up at something like this. Like, this is like the 5th version of the texture job. There was a few of them that I wish we would have saved them, that we were copying on.
I saved it. You want to see?
Saved it? Yeah, bring it. We would just like start laughing. No, but it was mostly how it looked in the shot.
Yeah.
You just looked like the happiest
but you
tiger.
can kind of
You could get an idea. Yeah.
Why can't I separate small circle part from the face from a separate object? I probably could. It just felt like it needed to be welded in. Right? Actually, this doesn't look so terrible. This is the version I fixed. Trying to load up.
There was one. Do you have the clown one?
Yeah, I'm looking for the clown one.
There was some that were really funny.
Okay. This one doesn't look so bad.
It doesn't look bad here. That's the thing. In the shot, it was so comical. You can kind of see it there.
You can kind of, in the shot, it looked like this, basically, right? So you could see the face, and it looked like a happy face.
It looked like, to me, it looked like the cat that you see at the Chinese restaurants that's always at the counter with like the big eyes. It just looks so goofy because the colors, for some reason, really popped in the shot. So all you saw was like the eye, like googly eyes looking at you, and then he looked like he had lipstick and he had like clown makeup. It was really funny.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like that here.
No, but anyway, this was that workflow. It certainly beats sculpting all the spirals in. So anyway, I'm glad that I jumped into substance designer. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to take over?
Sure.
Okay, give me 1 second. All right, so now we find ourselves here, right? So
you gotta share your screen.
Oh, am I not sharing it? There it is. Okay, so let's see. What number is this? So like I showed earlier, we were there. Then we knew we wanted the leopard. Now we have us a leopard, right? We have this, and we knew we wanted to add more decorations and all this stuff here. So let's go back to the shot real quick. So the next thing, there was a few other things. So the fire, we'll talk about that and the lighting involved with that in a minute. The floor was really detailed, and that's something. The idea here is you could see that the floor has like a frame around it, like it's like sacred ground. And in the ceremony, the only person that's able to walk through this is the person that's being initiated into this tribe's the warrior tribe. So it's our young girl Ala. So we wanted it to look really detailed, really kind of grimy. We didn't want it to look pretty, so you can see there's like little puddles. There's There's debris all over the place. And the only thing that was pretty about it is the fact that there's rose petals sprinkled through the path up to the altar, right? And there'll be some over here in the foreground. And the idea is we'll probably put like a red carpet or a drape on the platform itself. So, but the ground was a big thing because you're kind of flying over the ground, right? So let's look at that. So um, whenever you're doing stuff like grounds or planes, mixer's just the best thing in the world because it's optimized for this. The one thing that you want to make sure when you use mixer that you want to make sure you don't get this wrong is you start up the program and it asks you what resolution you want to work in, and you're used to other programs like Mudbox or ZBrush or whatever, where it asks you for the resolution up front, and then you're stuck with that resolution. And then at that point, increasing the resolution is just upscaling what was originally there. It's not giving you more detail. This is not like that. So this is your working resolution. So I kept this fairly low so that it works really fast. So I'm keeping this at 2K. I'm keeping this at 1K. Up close, you're not going to get the same level of detail. You can see if I go from 1K to 4K, but it doesn't really matter. Give it a second. You can see even here it's chugging. At export time, you can see it looks really beautiful at 4K, but working like this is just unbearable. It just starts going really slow. So I just work at a very low resolution. It's enough for me to see. Oh, I convinced you to get Gaia. That's cool.
Yeah, I'm reading the chat, so just
Yeah. So I work at a low resolution, and then if I want to check how things are looking, I could bring this up. At export time, you set the resolution, and at that point, you could set it to be as high resolution as you want, which is great. So you can see over here your export resolution. You can set it to 8K. So you're going to get crazy amount of resolution, but you're working at a very low resolution, which is the optimal way of working. Okay. So here we just have a rock surface. The other thing that's really amazing about this program is since it's created by Substance, not by Substance, by Megascans, you have access to all their shaders here, their texture libraries here. So you have resources that in thousands available to you. Then you have what's locally available to you. And you could just download and just apply it. Okay, so let's say I have a texture here. This is something that you guys should know if you decide to use this. The first thing that I did when I tried to apply anything here is I would select the model and drag it into my workspace here. If you do that, the program breaks. That's it. It breaks. It won't show you the layers, and it's busted. Not on every computer, but on a lot of them. So never click and drag over to your viewport. Just double click it and it'll appear on your layer stack. Very important. That drove me bananas. And I was like, oh my God, my graphics card sucks. Went through all this stuff to try to figure it out and then realized it is a known bug. They know about it. And that's their workaround. Just don't drag it, just click it. So started with a rock surface just to break this up. And my idea was start with hard rock and then go up to the softer stuff as you go up. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but you can see I have another rock here to just kind of try to break this up. And each one of these guys has this thing called a height. And you can see you could increase it or decrease it and blend between the two objects. Tran showed this, I think, last week with the huts. So it's the same concept here. But some of you guys are tuning in for the first time, so I thought I might as well show it. You could then go in and paint areas where you just want to do either pushing in or pushing out. And you can see in the bottom left here, you have up or down, kind of like ZBrush, and you could just push this in. You could increase the intensity and all that stuff, or you could bring it up. You can see it's starting to raise up. So pretty cool that you have these settings, kind of ZBrushy, but it's just on a plane. So I just went in there and broke up some areas, okay? And then started adding in some gravel. You can see it's actually filling in some of those holes, which is kind of cool, as gravel would, right? It would fill in the cavities, and then the rocks would kind of poke out through it. One thing about this is tiling. So some of the paint stuff is going to help break it up a little bit. The other thing is I'm using a noise to kind of mask it, not unlike what I was doing with Substance. So you could just go into your mask stack and add a Perlin noise, any kind of noise, just to get some variation. But it is a tileable texture in here, so just keep that in mind. I knew that I was going to put so much stuff on top of this that I wouldn't probably see any repetition, so I'm not that worried about it, even though here there's already some variation. So you could also add noises just to break the surface up on a displacement level, and that's just going the ups and downs. And the reason why you would want that again is if we go back over here, remember some of these shaders blend based on the height of that shader or the height of the surface. So by adding this kind of breakup to it, when you start implementing more shaders, it'll be affected based on the height of those surfaces. So I'm just adding a medium frequency and higher frequency breakup just to get some variation in here. And again, I'm thinking that I'm going to be on this kind of ground level like so. So I'm never going to be looking at it like this. I might look at it like this, but I know there's going to be a fire pit, 2 fire pits, the awesome leopard. If you're looking at this too much and trying to find patterns, we have bigger problems. Found some damp soil. Okay. And you could see as you move around, you could change the, like your environment lighting. So right now I just have this set to desert road, but you could change a few different settings here. So you can see we have some nice spec there. Some scattered stones. Remember, we're working at a low resolution. So at any point, like when I look at this, I'm like, that just kind of looks like noise. I could just come over here and just take a quick peek. Let's see what this looks like at 4K. So let's give it a second. And you can see, oh, that looks pretty nice. And my goal is to export this at 8K anyhow, so that's more than enough. But again, I'm working at 1024, which you have to have a little bit of faith in Megascan's resources, okay? Next up is a liquid layer. So you can see over here, you could just create liquid. And this thing is just the coolest thing in the world. So you just create this layer. You could control the threshold. So you could see you could have like a little, almost a swamp. You could bring this down, bring this up, a little bit of water, very little water, just like moisture. Or you could just make it completely liquid, right? We could bring this down like this. You have a few settings like depth. And you can see as I bring this down, this might not be so noticeable here. But you can see that doesn't look that deep anymore. It looks like a little puddle. The water's kind of clean. If your M&M fell in there, you might consider it. But you can bring this up here, and now you'd be like, oh man, you'll only eat it if no one's looking. But I was just kidding. But you could see it gets pretty nasty looking, which is just incredible that you have this this slider like this. Okay. Next up, so I didn't bring this anywhere near that. I think I kept it pretty low, maybe something like this, maybe a little bit higher, something like that, maybe. Next up, we had this pebble ground, because remember, I wanted this to feel like a pathway up to the platform. So I thought this was really nice, and I had to go in and create a mask to isolate where this stuff is going to be. So you can see I could keep painting over here, and now the path goes on this way. If you wanted to, you could have the path go this way. In all of these, you could control the height. You have to bring it down at a certain point. You see it's going to look not so great, but if this was down like this and this was beneath the liquid level, you could see exactly what would happen, which is so awesome. And then you could go to that liquid layer and then bring down this, and now you could see it poking out of some of the pebbles. That's not what I did, but just so you could see how incredibly awesome this program is. Okay, so you come over here, adjust your height, bring this up. So I wanted this to blend in nicely without having to trace every rock. And then the last thing was just throwing these fallen branches, which are probably not going to look very great at 1K. So let me bring this to 4K just so you can see. And you can see that now we have like this little hay all over the ground, which looks really nice. Just breaks it up, gives it a nice detail. So if we go back here, you can see that there's these rose petals all over. And the original goal, or the original plan was, hey, we have rose petals here. Let's click this. So you'll see there'll be some rose petals appearing here. Throw those on top of there. Looks pretty nice. But I didn't like it. I started seeing too much repetition, and I wanted it to really feel like a trail. So I ended up modeling the petals by hand, doing like soft selections to make them feel more like there's a shape to them rather than a flat thing, and then manually place them, which I'll show you in a second. But that's it. So no rose petals. So now I have this thing, but remember, this is created to be applied on a plane. So the next step, let's close this, export these maps out, 8K, whatever, bring them into Mudbox and basically do the exact same process that Tran just showed you on the spirals, but doing it inside of Mudbox.
So a couple questions, which someone answered in the chat. Does UE5 now support UDIMs? Yeah, it does. It supports it basically automatically. You can import just the first UDIM. It will recognize the other ones, and it will just convert it to a virtual texture. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah,
Super.
it's super easy.
Yeah, super easy.
It's so easy that it's sometimes scary because you don't know if it even, you're like, are you recognizing my UDIM? Like,
yeah, it wasn't like that before. Someone got into Pixel Venture, got into Gaia, which Gaia is awesome, and I'm glad someone found the leopard process helpful. I actually think it's a good technique.
Yeah. So let me open this up. Give me 1 second.
And thanks for the compliments. So
Yeah, definitely.
everyone who says nice, looks great, we really appreciate hearing that.
We actually go back and read all the comments. Like if we don't reply to anything, sometimes we don't see them while we're working because we feel like deer in headlights while we're doing this. We're not that cool. We feel super nervous about the fact that there's a camera there.
We're not cool at all.
While we're focusing on our work, we're like, So reading that and then working sometimes is distracting for us. So, okay, so here you go. So you can see we just have a plane. Bring it in here. Subdivide the plane a bunch of times and then just mesh. Sorry, UVs and maps, sculpt using map. So I already did it, so I'm not going to do it, but I'll show you how I did it anyway. So I subdivided the model quite a bit. I think it's like 20 million polygons. Select the model, select the displacement map that was exported out of Mixer. You could set the midpoint to 0.5 I play around with it. I'll sometimes try it at 0, sometimes 0.5, 0.5 seem to work. And then I'll just press go. And when it's done, it'll put it on a layer, which is your displacement layer. So you have this, okay? And if you want to make any changes to it, you could just come in there. If you want to overcrank it, you can see that the default settings that it brought it at is usually 100. So I brought it in like this. So I had to bring it up to 1000%. And that's some of the stuff that I love about just Mudbox's layer system that I find so powerful is like I could go in here, duplicate this layer, mask it out, and it just acts like Photoshop. It's always like Photoshop. Like the one thing that I always show that I still think is amazing, and I'm not sure if ZBrush can do this yet, but the fact that I can come over here, for example, grab a noise, let's just say this, right? This is on a separate layer, right? And if I go in and smooth this, I have the option to affect all layers or to not affect all layers. So you can see when I have affect all layers turned off, when I smooth that layer, it's not wiping out all the detail of everything else, right? It is only wiping out that one layer as it should. I mean, that's what layers are for, right? And I don't know if it does it like this yet, but for years
It doesn't do that.
it does not do that.
No.
No, it still doesn't do that. So when you use the smooth brush and ZBrush and you have layers, it wipes out all the details. So what is the point of layers if it wipes out everything on the other layers? So that to me is still the point why I'm still like the last. Well, Ian Spriggs is another one of the old guys still hanging on, and some of the guys at Weta to Mudbox, but that
Yeah, but
alone
that's
is
not,
a huge thing for
it's
me.
not the same. Morph targets, I know what you're talking about. I'm looking at the chat. Someone's saying you can use layers, morph targets. That's like a workaround for it.
It's a workaround, yeah, because remember the whole thing here is that you're smoothing, and it's just smoothing that one layer. It's not wiping out everything else. In ZBrush, when you smooth, it does this.
I like ZBrush. I think ZBrush is amazing. So
Yeah, I mean, I have it. So you have to know everything, right? You should use everything, and
just use the right tool for
exactly,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. This is not. I'm just saying. What a lot of people are like, why do you still use this program? This is why. I use ZBrush for a bunch of stuff, even on the stuff I showed you today. Everything is decimated. Yeah. So it's just use the best thing. Like unless they're paying for your rent, don't get too caught up in like brand loyalty of software. So use everything. So, which by the way, I did that on all of this stuff. All of these things, even though they're all modeled in Mudbox, even like the Tusk and the scans, everything is then ran into ZBrush and decimated in ZBrush because their decimation tool is incredible. This has a decimation tool, but it doesn't retain the UVs, which makes it useless. So anyway, there you go. You have this model. Export this model out, bring it into ZBrush, decimate it, and then bring it in to Unreal. And we have our converted into nanite. And there you have your floor. So you can see we have all the nice puddles or the feeling of water. Because remember that there actually is no depth there, but it kind of feels like it. And then the rose petals are just placed on top to break up the surface. I also added like secondary little twigs and stuff just to break it up even more. Like around the connection points, you could see like here, putting little rocks so it feels like these things are being jabbed into the ground. You want that attention to detail. You want something holding this up, stuff like that. So it's little details, but yeah. So that's your ground. That's your leopard. The mega scan planks used on the sides. The museum scans for the tusks, and each one of these. So this is 1 set, 2 sets, 3 sets, 4 sets. We did end up reusing them in the back. You can see that they're holding the curtains in place, those are so far back, that we knew you would never notice it if they were repeated again. So it's not a big deal. The fire is still from Action VFX. One thing I want to talk about real quick, and I don't know, should I mention the lighting stuff now, or do you want to go?
I have some floor stuff to control.
All right, so Tran is going to show some stuff, and then if we have time, I'm going to show you guys some stuff on some of the atmospheric tricks that I did to make the fire look a little bit more real.
Yeah, I'll be brief on mine because I think Miguel's topic is interesting.
The trans thing is cool.
More interesting. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so a couple of things I want to show. So I like ZBrush a lot. The problem I had here, so if we look far away, this is a Quixel mixer floor piece I made. And what we've been doing is just trying to displace it in order to get geometry. Whenever I do this in ZBrush, what I get a lot are, this is what I was talking about, stair stepping, right? So the mesh will not displace smooth. For the most part, like if you're going to decimate it, if you're not going to go that high, you won't really notice it. But I did not want this on the leopard. That's why I took it to Mudbox and displaced it, because I don't really, it's not this stuff that you're seeing here. This shape, that's not actually supposed to be there. That's just what happens when you use ZBrush to try to displace. And it's a common problem. So whenever I see it come up, I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna do this in Mudbox and it won't show up. So that's why I did it there. You know, you can see it far away still, right? So it really bothers me. Quickly, the things I want to show that I spent my time on is I started making more pieces like this. So I made a few sheets. Let me just try loading another one. This might take a second. Okay, that might take a while. I'll jump back into it, and let me just jump into Unreal. So I spent part of my week working on the leopard and working on the scene that Miguel showed, and I also spent a little bit of time coming back to this scene, which looks similar to before. Let's just play it, but it actually has a little bit more polish on it, right? So not really big changes compositionally, but all the details are a little bit nicer in the shot. So if we look at this, let me just jump out of my camera. I spent time laying in the floor pieces that I made here, and I got some puddles, right? So I created a bunch of sheets. In Quixel Mixer, you can create large sheets or small sheets, and I create small sheets. And the other thing that I found trouble with, let me just pull up a Megascan piece. So 3D asset, let me just search it up. I have a bunch of stuff. Why is this not showing? It was, in particular, this one. All the assets from Megascans are really amazing, obviously because they are coming from scan data. But if you notice here, what happens with a lot of these is, you know, you might have something like this, it dips in, and then it comes and it curves back up. So you're getting kind of like these curves coming back up at the edge, which is like really tough when you're trying to place things, right? So what would happen oftentimes is I try to put a floor in, and I keep having the ends kind of pop out like this, and then it would just not be as fast as processed because I'm sitting there trying to rotate it, or I end up pushing it down so low that I really don't end up not using most of my floor piece. So I spent part of the time going into ZBrush, grabbing the pieces I liked, and just pulling down the edges so that when we look at the cross section, instead of it doing this, let's just say this is a profile, just went in and made sure it did that, which is super tedious and long because once you do this, you have to reconvert it to nanite, which takes a ton of time. Was it ultimately worth it? Yeah, it actually was. Now, since I was making these Quixel mixer ground pieces, so here's like one of my puddle floor pieces that I made. I didn't want to come into that same problem again, right? So what I did was I created a base plane mesh. Let me just import it. Give me one moment. And the mesh is just a square, right? It takes up the first UDIM. And what it does is it bumps up. Now, it starts out like this, but I might squish it a little bit. But you can see the profile. And I think this is actually really important if anyone's considering this, because this will actually save you a lot of time. It seems like a dumb tip, but it's not, because if someone just told me this, I'd be like, oh, okay. But now the profile does this, right? So now I don't have, once I displace it, it's going to change a little bit. Of course, it's going to be more complicated. But overall, there will be a slight curve. Now, what you want to be careful of is these things that hump up aren't like too much like this, because then when you start placing it in your scene, your ground's going to look like a bunch of little bumps, which is also what you don't want in your ground. So just the right amount. And that's what I spent a lot of time on. But I thought this was critical. Just make sure whatever floor you make doesn't pop up so that you can actually place the things in. And having spent a lot of time trying to correct the Megascan pieces that do bump up, and then making these ones, it's, just a tedious task. Okay. You want to jump to your lighting?
You should show like with unlit so they could see how you're using it.
Okay. Well, unlit or just post process?
Whichever. Yeah, post process off.
Okay. So I'm turning off the post process. So now it's gone from night to daytime. And then you can see a little bit more of the floor. Last week when we showed off the scene, the floor was just not really anything. It was just like one big dirt tile. So you can see what they look like here. These are the Megascan pieces, or sorry, Quixel mixer pieces.
Hold on, let me answer a few questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you turn off motion blur in UE5? You actually have to turn it on. So yes, so you turn it on in the post process. So yes, it's off by default. We have it on because I love blur. I love images looking soft. I don't want it to look sharp. So any imperfections, that's great.
How many triangles is floor? I don't know. It's just all nanite.
So that was that. How many triangles? I don't know how much it is in nanite, but I'll tell you how much it is. It was 20 million, so it's 10 million polygons, the ground decimated.
On yours, right?
On mine, yeah. And it doesn't even care, right? It's showing all of this stuff in real time with fire, with the reflections, 10 million polygon ground. That's not a normal map on it. That's the raw geo, which is just
crazy.
Just crazy.
Yeah, we've never gotten to work like that before. So now that we can, it's nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is the floor stuff. So these are all the planes, and then a lot of them are some I made, and a lot of them are just from Megascans, and most of them have been all modified. But it was much easier. Like it took like a day to do this, but the amount of time I save later in the future, I'm kind of going to reuse these floor sheets that I made. It's worth it, right?
Pixel Ventures comedian.
What do you say?
He said, "Nanite rocks."
See what I did? Okay, yeah. Anyway, I went back and I polished the stuff, and we didn't finish this back here because just because storytelling, we weren't really sure about certain things. But I think this, ground is underestimated. Like a lot of times you have these nice rocks from mega scans and you can throw them in and you can smash them together. But floors are tricky. So you just think that they're going to be easy, but they're not.
Did we have any issues bringing water puddles in Unreal? There really is no water puddles.
No, they're just fake. They're
just
just texture. Yeah.
That's what we were showing with.
Yeah. So it's not actually real
Mixer.
water. So if we go look back in Mixer, it's just fake. So it's just an illusion.
It's completely believable though.
Yeah, but what the liquid layer does, if you go into like what it looks like before, is it just flattens it out, right? So the geometry is completely flat and makes it. If we look at the passes, so it makes the area flat, and if you look at the roughness, it's really low roughness, just like what you would think from water, right? So it's all done. It's just a texture job. So you can see how well that works, right? And you thought it was water. That means it works really good. So yeah. Anyway, you want to take over?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot of time, but I'll show you some of the things that I thought were so let me see, how do I get my screen up there? Okay, cool.
Got it.
Yeah. So let me just make sure everything else is closed. Okay. So just lighting of this, there was a few things that I started really using on this one. So let me just close some of this stuff here. So the big thing is, okay, so I did use post-process volume like I normally use it. So you can see if I turn off the post-process volume, it's much brighter. If you guys are tuning into this one for the first time, on the last episode, we talked about how I'm using the manual exposure settings. So the manual exposure settings, this is one thing I didn't mention last week, which is something that you should be aware of. So you can see when you set this here, and then when you go to your camera settings, you have your shutter speed, which should basically say 1/48th of a second. Your ISO, so we have it at 1500 ISO, which is, that seems realistic. You have a 1.4 aperture f-stop. So your f-stop is like your iris, right? The smaller that number gets, the more it could see in darkness, right? And that's literally the aperture, the iris of the lens. The more it closes, the more it can see in darkness, right? So the lower this number is, the more it sees in darkness. The best example is you're having a hard time reading something because it's dark. What do your eyes naturally do? They squint. Your eyes are closing just like the iris of a lens. 1.4, boom, you can now see in darkness better, okay? Your eye opens up because, oh my God, I'm out in daylight. Now you can see everything. A bunch more light is coming in. Everything is going to be in focus, right? Whereas when you squint, just the thing you're focusing on is in focus and everything else goes blurry. Your eyes are literally behaving like the aperture of a camera. Okay, but here's what I didn't mention last time. So if you have all these settings here, so you have your manual here, you have your f-stop set to 1.4. Okay, that's great. But when you come over here to your sequencer, one thing to keep in mind is the settings here are overriding it. So if I turn off view through my cinema actor, you could see that it reverts back to 1.4, which is the default settings of the camera, which is brighter, 1.4, more more open. Sorry, so it's more light's coming in. When I turn on the cinema camera, you can see that the current aperture says 2.0. So 2 is going to get darker. If I put 3 here, it's going to get darker. If it's going to go 4, here it's going to get darker. But the minute I stop looking through my camera, it reverts back to the post-process volume settings. So that's something important to know, because when you're not using the physical camera, you could just use, sorry, when you're not using the physical metering, you could basically use this aperture setting for just getting defocus. You just bring this number down, everything goes out of focus. You bring it up, everything goes in focus. But once you're using the physical metering, it truly is behaving like a real camera in here in terms of the brightness of the scene. So you can't just get more defocus without it affecting the brightness of the scene. So that's just something that is good to know. Okay, so again, set it back to 2. That's what I kind of liked. Maybe I'll set it to 1.8. Just get a little bit more light. Looks good. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing that is pretty useful to know, give me 1 second. My scene just started going really slow. Let me actually not turn off my sequencer. Just give me 1 second. Is the volumetrics. I have this here. All right, it's just so I have this. Okay. All right. So if I create any light, so if I create a spotlight and I bring it over here, zoom into it, bring this down by the ground here, you can see that that light is affecting this area here. And I could obviously bring up the brightness of this guy. Okay. I could set the temperature, which is based on the Kelvin scale, lower the number, becomes more red like a candle. Higher the number, it becomes bluer until it becomes almost white like daylight. Okay, so you have that. So let's say if I set this to something like this. The setting that I really started using on this scene a lot is if I go to this light and I put up volumetric, you could see that you have your volumetric scattering. Is that intensity, I guess? Yeah, intensity. Okay, so for these guys here, these fire pits, you can see that they really feel pretty real, not just because of the smoke coming up, but there's like this aura that is coming out around it. So what I did for those guys, and I'm going to show you with this guy here, is just go into that volumetric scattering and just really over crank this thing. When you over crank it, it gives the illusion that it's illuminating all the particulate in that area. It's very useful to get this sort of smoky effect, right? But what's also powerful about it is like if I come over here to the fire pit, you can see that it is made out of 2 separate lights. I have this one here that is illuminating all the stuff on the ground. And then I have this guy up here that is kind of like a bounce light illuminating the surroundings, right? The guy on the top is doing a lot in terms of creating this bounce light. But if I have this setting too high, it's going to look like, hey, wait a minute. I thought this smoke was coming out of the fire. Now it looks like it's coming out of this orb that is floating over the fire. You see what I mean? So it's important. Let me see where I have this here. It's important to make sure that you select just the right light to increase the volumetric intensity on. So let me just come over here. So you can see this guy, his volumetric intensity is set to 0, even though he is the brighter of the lights of the 2. And this guy, the one that is actually just illuminating like the little rocks and stuff on the ground level here, he's the one that has the volumetric intensity brought up really high. And it's the thing that's casting this really nice aura around the smoke. So I think that was a very useful thing because once I started using that, started using it strategically in certain areas, like, hey, I don't want to see my light shape. So you can see here, for example, if you don't use this wisely, you might find yourself in a situation where you'll have a light visible in the shot that is supposed to act as a bounce light, but all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a minute, I could totally see the effect of the light on the fog, I just wanted it to be a bounce light. So you can see if I set that to 0, now it's not affecting the fog at all, but it's illuminating the floor. That's something very important to keep in mind while you work, because not all the time do you want the light to feel like it's coming from a particular light source. So when you look over here, all of these guys here, there's no light there. Those are supposed to look like they're being illuminated either by these guys, or these curtains here look like they're supposed to be illuminated by this fire here. Maybe you could say these guys are illuminated by these torches, but we want all this to feel like a bounce light almost. So they all have light sources around there, but if they were casting a bunch of volumetric intensity, it would become obvious that there's a light back there which wouldn't look real. Now all of a sudden it looks like a theater show. Do you see what I mean? Because now it looks like, oh, that's being illuminated by a spotlight back there. Wait, how did these natives get spotlights? Do you see what I'm saying? So it's trying to fake that effect. So we don't want these lights back here to look like there's a light by them. That's like a fake bounce light. Yes, there is a light there. Yes, that wouldn't actually illuminate back there probably. But we don't want it to feel fake. So that's just something that I found very useful. Use this volumetric scattering intensity to control your fog. Yeah, that's it. I mean, a lot of you guys might be rolling your eyes going like, I already knew that. I didn't know that. I wasn't using that correctly. And I found that to be extremely helpful. And you could see again here, so all of this red light here, you can see I have a spotlight here. So it looks like, oh, this is the bounce light from this torch. None of these torches emit light. So this looks like, oh, there's this nice bounce light. The one thing I found is the spotlights are much faster, at least on the tests that I've done, than a point light. Even though the natural thing that you would go to would be a point light because you want the light to emit from to all directions, you have to look at this and be like, okay, if this is a torch here, there's really nothing above it that I want to illuminate, just the stuff on the ground. And maybe this guy over here, I could bring this up just enough to illuminate that tusk, but I don't really care if it does the tusk. But this is acting as just a fake bounce light. There's fake bounce lights all over here. You could see these guys here.
Want to add more fog?
So there's fake lights over here just to illuminate these candles for the ritual. And again, if I went over to them and I cranked up volumetric, they would no longer look like they're emitting from the candle, but it looks like there's a floating light bulb there.
A ball, yeah.
So just something to keep in mind, something that I found very useful for myself. So yeah, that's it. One thing that I plan on doing, and I might do it with this scene or with one of the other scenes, is just start lighting from nothing on like one of these and just be like, okay, how would I approach the lighting from scratch, and just my approach to it, which we may do later down the line. Maybe when we start running out of new things to show, we'll start doing stuff like that. But yeah, so
Couple questions. Is Substance 3D Sampler similar to Quixel Mixer? I haven't used Substance 3D Sampler. It seems like it's very similar. The big upside to Quixel Mixer is that it's pretty easy to use. The learning curve, it's not huge. It's not a complicated program. The second thing is you can access all their library. Megascans has an insane library of textures. That's really hard. I think it's really hard for Substance to compete with that. Substance doesn't offer a bunch of materials that are free. So that's a huge thing.
So Jackie's saying I need to switch the point light to mobility to movable, maybe. Yeah, that's a cool thing. I'll try that out and see. A lot of this for us is like, we know 3D, we don't know Unreal, which I think is part of the appeal and what I hope part of the approach that we're doing, that we're figuring this out as we go and still managing to make stuff look pretty cool. But yeah, but thank you. I'm going to check that out actually as soon as I get off this. Sometimes I export. So thank you, Pixel Venture.
Are you guys considering adding more fog? Ricardo.
I always want more fog, Ricardo. Always want more fog. I'm gonna have a fog machine behind me next week. So yeah, that my ex students make fun of me because my first note is always it needs more fog. So yeah, it still needs more fog. So, any other questions? Thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's nothing else, let me see. I think you mentioned adding flickering to the lights. Well, did I mention adding flickering to the lights? Yes. I will show you how to do flickering lights as soon as I figure out how to do flickering lights, because I have no idea how to do it at the moment.
But here's the thing, like, we do feel coming onto the streams like, well, we're not experts in Unreal. You feel awkward doing it, or insecure. But I think we've been doing VFX for so long that you always feel insecure no matter what. So that's just part of the process. All VFX artists are in a position where, or anyone, whether they're VFX or doing Unreal or games, they're in a position where they have to constantly learn new things anyway. So it's impossible for someone to know everything. It's just not possible, right? So in that sense, along with time and age and realizing I'm never going to know everything, we're always going to be constantly learning. That's how it should be, because everything's changing. There's always new tools. So that's the boat. It's constantly changing and learning boat.
Yeah. So Dennis is asking, will we be going over storyboarding and writing process? I think we are. I think the next step is we just want to make sure that this is probably what's going to happen. We're going to finish up the sets, and then we should be getting some of the rigs of the models soon, and then just start blocking out at least every camera and trying to put it into some sort of edit. And we could go over a portion of that. So definitely, in terms of the writing, possibly. The thing that's happened is as we're writing some of this stuff, we're like, oh, you know what? We should elaborate on this scene or that scene. That's partially why we haven't shown the script yet, but that's definitely something that we could talk about. The other thing we're going to talk about is casting. So we're casting all the voices for this soon. So where are we getting our actors? And we're going to do one on music, which we're doing with Dan Dombrowski. So how are we doing the music? We're looking for a certain drummer. So I do play drums. I do play percussion. So I might play some of the drums on this if there's anything. But we want to get like a pretty cool sounding tribal soundtrack to this. There's this one drum in particular that we really like that just sounds really deep and evil that we like. So we're looking for a specific drummer that plays that. I think it's called the frame drum or the hand drum, one or the others, but it's pretty long. I think it's a frame drum, and it's pretty thin. It's not deep, but it just has an incredible sound. Like if you just run your finger over the head of the drum, it sounds ethereal and evil. So it's pretty cool.
Other questions, like how long you guys plan to work this project? We have to finish like in 6 months. We didn't actually have skin materials, so we're not going to go over that.
Yeah, our characters.
We don't actually have displacements, and that was a thing that basically our base mesh has to be pretty high to support like the base geometry, and then the normal map. That's all we're doing. So high base mesh, making sure our shapes are supported, but also like if you look at it, it's not, the hair is probably has the most change in in the shape. So the hair is super dense, and that's the way we're doing it. We don't have displacements on it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So in terms of the skin, like we want the characters to look like stop motion animation dolls. We
Yeah.
don't want to. One thing we didn't want to do with this project is uh, try to fight the technical limitations. We wanted to just put these characters that look like dolls in beautiful environments, but never aim for photorealism or like really detailed eyes and perfect skin or something
Yeah.
that Blur would do. And they have much more resources than us. So instead of trying to fight that, we wanted to embrace it.
It doesn't seem like Unreal struggles with high base meshes. It's also not that high. So all the characters were custom retopoled. So the topology is all hand drawn. If you hand draw your topology, you can control the density where you need it. So that's why things like Z-remesher, quad mesher, redraw, I'm saying it all wrong, but they don't work because they're automatically doing it, and you're not controlling where it's supposed to be. So like in this character that Miguel is showing, areas around the eyes, around the mouth are going to always be more dense, right? And you can only do that control if you do it by hand, and that's why you have to still do it by hand.
So you could see like this is early stuff, but you can start seeing the blend shapes on the characters, and you could see. So this is done again by our friend Chris Boschatnik. Worked on Thanos, so he's badass. But you could see the smile, like it's affecting even the ears as it would if you were to do an extreme smile like that. So these are going to look really awesome. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see it. But yeah, basically these first few streams, I think we've managed to get some art direction, and so the sets are not 100% complete. We'll probably end up polishing stuff, and then once we place camera angles, we'll probably change things, and
Yeah, the
so
big thing is like, okay, that angle looks great, but there's nothing else here. So we need a reverse angle of this. So, what does that look like?
yeah.
We don't have that.
No, I'll probably jump back onto some character stuff that.
Yeah.
So
So yeah,
yeah,
I think
but
the next thing is we're gonna take the sets a little bit further, then we're gonna just finish up some of the characters, and then start doing real tests with motion capture, which is it's the next daunting thing.
last question, is there a way to make quad remesher to paint areas we want more? Yeah, you can do that. You can do that with vertex painting inside Maya. If you, what you can do, I'll probably forget your message, but we do read the comments on YouTube. If you type that in, I'll try to see if I can include it in our next stream. So
Yeah, we reply to every message. So
yeah, it is nice to hear. I'm not trying to plug anything, but like if I look at the comments and I see comments like, no, I like that information you went over, then I go, oh, okay. So you want, you know, um, so when you're watching this, I have an idea of what the audience is interested in. So
yeah,
if you write stuff in the comments or in the chat, but definitely, it's a way for us to look back and go, oh, this topic seems to be interesting, and this other topic people are interested in. So
yeah,
it would be a great thing to have.
yeah. So if there's any other questions, it's now or never. If not, we're gonna sign off.
And we'll be back next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Uh, yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. See you
So
guys
let
next
me
week.
figure out how to
Bye.
do this. And I think it's this one. Okay. See you guys.